Faithy shocking truth about John Wayne. Faithy golden sun sets behind a dusty Hollywood backlot. A man in a 10-gallon hat walks slowly toward the camera, spurs jingling with each step. His shadow stretches long across the desert sand, and for a moment he looks exactly like every cowboy hero America has ever loved. But what if I told you that everything you believe about this man is a lie? Asterisk. What if the greatest cowboy who ever lived never rode a horse until Hollywood paid him to? What if America's toughest gunslinger was actually terrified of firearms? What if the man who defined the American West was just a scared kid from Iowa who couldn't even use his real name? This is the story they never wanted you to know. The story of Marion Morrison, the man the world called John Wayne. The camera pulls back, revealing not the endless frontier but a movie set. The cowboy removes his hat, and suddenly he is not a legend anymore. He is just a man carrying the weight of a myth he never asked for. Asterisk, a farm boy from nowhere. Picture this. Winterset, Iowa, 1907. A small farming town where the biggest excitement comes from watching corn grow and waiting for the next train to pass through. No tumbleweeds, no cattle drives, no gunfights at high noon. Just endless fields, bitter winters, and the quiet desperation of families struggling to make ends meet. Into this world was born a boy named Marion Robert Morrison. Not John. Not even close to John. Marion a name so delicate, so far removed from the rugged masculinity he would later embody, that it seems almost cruel in retrospect. Marion's father, Clyde, wasn't a gunslinger or a ranch owner. He was a pharmacist who couldn't even make his small-town drugstore profitable. The family was so poor that, when Marion was 4 years old, they loaded everything they owned into a wagon and headed west not to seek adventure or strike it rich, but because they were running from failure. They settled in Palmdale, California, where Clyde tried his hand at farming, but the Morrison family wasn't blessed with green thumbs or good luck. The farm failed. They moved again, this time to Glendale, where Clyde returned to pharmacy work, and Marion grew up in the shadow of the Hollywood Hills, never imagining that those distant mountains would one day make him the most famous cowboy in the world. Here is what they don't tell you in the biographies. Marion Morrison was afraid of horses. Not just nervous around them, genuinely terrified. As a child, whenever the family visited relatives who owned livestock, Marion would hide behind his mother's skirts rather than get close to any animal larger than a house cat. The irony is breathtaking, isn't it? The man who would become synonymous with horseback riding spent his childhood running away from the very creatures that would make him famous. But fear wasn't Marion's only secret. He was also incredibly shy, almost painfully so. While other boys his age were getting into fights and asserting their dominance, Marion buried his nose in books and spent hours at the local movie theater, watching the early Western films of Tom Mix and William S. Hart. He wasn't dreaming of being a cowboy, he was dreaming of being an actor. The transformation began in high school, but not in the way you might expect. Marion's parents divorced when he was 13, and suddenly this scared, bookish kid found himself responsible for helping support his family. He took any job he could find, working in a local ice cream parlor, delivering newspapers, anything to bring in a few extra dollars. It was during this period that something interesting happened. Marion's nickname became Duke, earned not through any act of heroism or toughness, but because he was always accompanied by a large Airedale terrier named Duke. The local firemen started calling him Big Duke, and his dog Little Duke. And somehow, the name stuck. Marion Morrison was slowly disappearing, replaced by Duke Morrison, and eventually by a man who never truly existed. The image shifts to a young Marion, barely recognizable as the future John Wayne, standing awkwardly in front of a movie theater showing a Western film. He is clutching a movie ticket, his eyes wide with wonder, not at cowboys and horses, but at the magic of storytelling itself. Asterisk the accidental cowboy Duke Morrison arrived at the University of Southern California on a football scholarship. And for a brief, shining moment, it seemed like he might have found his true calling at 6'4". And over 200 pounds, he was an imposing figure on the football field. But even here, the man who would become America's symbol of rugged individualism was following someone else's script. He wasn't passionate about football. Fahey was good at it because he was big and strong and needed the scholarship money. His real love remained the movies. He spent every spare moment at the campus theater or downtown at the grand movie palaces, watching everything from Charlie Chaplin comedies to the latest Western serials. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. A shoulder injury ended Duke's football career before it really began. And with it went his scholarship. Suddenly, he was just another broke college kid in Los Angeles, scrambling to pay rent and buy food. That is when a football teammate mentioned that the studio sometimes hired college athletes as laborers and extras. Duke's first job in Hollywood wasn't riding into the sunset or facing down bandits. Fahey was moving furniture. He worked as a prop man at Fox Film Corporation, earning $35 a week, hauling sofas and dinner tables from soundstage to soundstage. It was honest work, but hardly glamorous. The irony is that during this period, Duke Morrison was probably closer to the real experience of the American West than he ever would be as John Wayne. He was just another working man, struggling to make ends meet, taking whatever jobs he could find. It was while working as a prop man that Duke first met director John Ford, though their initial encounter was far from the stuff of legend. Ford was known for his volcanic temper and his particular disdain for what he saw as entitled college boys. When he discovered that one of his prop men was a former USC football player, Ford made it his mission to humble the young man. "You think you are tough, college boy," Ford would growl, assigning Duke the most back-breaking tasks he could think of. "Let's see how tough you are when you are hauling a piano up 3 flights of stairs." But something unexpected happened during those early humiliations. Ford began to notice that Duke never complained, never talked back, never showed anything but quiet determination to get the job done. In a town full of pretty boys and smooth talkers, here was someone who understood the value of hard work. Still, Duke Morrison wasn't trying to become an actor. That happened almost by accident. The story goes that Ford needed someone to appear in the background of a scene in Hangman's House, 1928. And Duke happened to be the right size and was available. No lines, no close-ups, just a tall figure in the crowd. But the camera caught something in his face, something honest and unpretentious that stood out among the theatrical poses of the trained actors around him. The scene transforms to show a young Duke Morrison, still awkward and uncertain, standing on the edge of a movie set. In the background, real cowboys Fahey hired as consultants and extras. Fahey laugh and joke easily with horses and props that Duke eyes nervously. Fate, the birth of a lie. Fahey here is where the story takes its most fascinating turn, where Marion Morrison began to disappear forever, and John Wayne started to emerge from pure fiction. In 1930, Duke was given his first starring role in The Big Trail, a big-budget Western epic that was supposed to launch him to stardom. But there was one problem. Duke Morrison didn't sound like a movie star. The name was too soft, too feminine for a leading man in a genre that demanded absolute masculinity. The studio executives huddled in their offices, chain smoking cigarettes and trying to figure out what to call their new star. They considered various combinations, testing how different names would look on a movie poster. They tried Duke Morrison, but it didn't have enough gravitas. They experimented with Tony Wayne and Michael Morrison, but nothing clicked. Finally, someone Fahey history has never definitively recorded who Fahey suggested John Wayne. John for John the Baptist, a strong biblical name. Wayne for Revolutionary War general. Mad Anthony Wayne, a hero known for his courage and tactical brilliance. It was perfect, American, masculine, memorable. But here is what they don't tell you, Fahey. The man who would become John Wayne hated the name at first. "It doesn't sound like me," he reportedly told the studio executives. "I don't feel like a John Wayne." And he was right. John Wayne was everything. Marion Morrison wasn't confident, fearless, comfortable in his own skin. John Wayne could handle any horse, outdraw any gunslinger, win any fight. Marion Morrison was still afraid of horses and had never fired a gun in his life. The studio's solution was both simple and devastating. They would teach Marion Morrison how to become John Wayne. The transformation was systematic and merciless. First came the horse riding lessons. Duke was assigned to work with veteran Western performers, who taught him not just how to stay in the saddle, but how to make it look effortless. For weeks, he fell off horses, got stepped on by horses, and went home each night covered in bruises and dust. "I spent more time on my back in the dirt than I did in the saddle," he would later joke, but at the time it wasn't funny. Every day was a reminder that he was pretending to be something he wasn't, that his entire career was built on learning to fake the very skills that were supposed to come naturally to his character. Then came the weapons training. Duke had to learn how to handle everything from Colt .45 revolvers to Winchester rifles, how to draw quickly without shooting himself in the foot, how to look comfortable with instruments of violence that privately terrified him. But perhaps the most challenging part was learning the walk. Watch any John Wayne film and you'll notice his distinctive swagger, a rolling gait that suggests a man who has spent his life on horseback and is slightly uncomfortable on solid ground. That walk didn't come naturally to Duke Morrison. It was carefully designed and endlessly practiced based on his observation of actual cowboys and his own physical limitations. The truth is, Duke walked that way partly because of old football injuries that had never properly healed, and partly because he was consciously trying to appear more masculine. But over time, as John Wayne became more real than Marion Morrison, the walk became genuine. He wasn't pretending to be a cowboy anymore. He was pretending to be himself. The image shows Duke in front of a mirror, practicing his draw while wearing an oversized cowboy hat. Behind him, real cowboys watch with a mixture of amusement and sympathy, understanding that they're witnessing something both tragic and necessary. The weight of a myth. By the 1940s, John Wayne had become more than just a movie star. He was an American institution. But success came with a price that Marion Morrison never anticipated. He was disappearing. Friends from his childhood began to notice that Duke seemed uncomfortable whenever they called him by his real name. At parties, if someone introduced him as Marion Morrison, he would quickly correct them. "It is John," he would say, "or Duke if you've known me long enough." But the most telling moments came when he was alone with horses. Despite decades of practice, despite appearing in over 170 films, many of them westerns, John Wayne never truly became comfortable around horses. His co-stars knew to avoid mentioning it, but crew members would sometimes catch glimpses of the truth. John Wayne, America's greatest cowboy, quietly asking a stunt double to handle the more challenging riding scenes. "The Duke was a lot of things," recalled stuntman Dean Smith, who worked with Wayne on over 20 films, "but a natural horseman wasn't one of them. He was always thinking about it, always concentrating. Real cowboys, they don't think about sitting a horse any more than they think about breathing for Duke. It was work until the day he died." The firearms remained problematic too. Wayne became competent enough to handle guns safely on camera, but he never enjoyed it. Friends reported that at his ranch, he was more likely to be found reading scripts than practicing his draw. When pressed, he would admit that the sound of gunfire still made him nervous. "All those movies, all those gunfights, and I never got used to the noise," he once confided to director Howard Hawks. "Every time someone fired a blank near me, I'd flinch a little inside." But perhaps the cruelest irony was this: as John Wayne became more famous, Marion Morrison became more lost. By the 1950s, Wayne's public persona had completely overshadowed his private personality. Interviewers expected him to be the strong, silent type from his films. Fans approached him expecting cowboy wisdom and frontier courage. Politicians used his image to represent American values. But in quiet moments, friends could see glimpses of the scared kid from Iowa who just wanted to make movies. Duke was always performing, recalled actress Maureen O'Hara, who starred opposite Wayne in multiple films, even when he thought the cameras were off, even when he was just sitting around having coffee. Part of him was still being John Wayne. I don't think he knew how to be Marion Morrison anymore. The pressure to maintain the myth was constant and exhausting. Wayne couldn't afford to be seen struggling with a horse, couldn't be photographed looking uncertain or afraid, couldn't express political opinions that didn't align with his screen persona. John Wayne had to be consistently heroic, consistently confident, consistently the man that Marion Morrison never was. The scene shifts to Wayne sitting alone in his dressing room after a long day of shooting, removing his cowboy hat and staring at his reflection. For a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracks, and you can see the exhaustion of a man who has spent decades pretending to be someone else. The final performance in his later years. John Wayne achieved something remarkable and tragic. He became the myth so completely that even he sometimes forgot where John Wayne ended and Marion Morrison began. The evidence is everywhere if you know where to look. Watch his final films like The Shootist, 1876, and you can see a man grappling with mortality while still maintaining the facade of invincibility. Wayne was dying of cancer during that production, but he insisted on doing his own writing scenes, even though every movement caused him pain. He was more John Wayne in those final years than he'd ever been, observed director Don Siegel. It was like he'd decided that if he was going to die, he was going to die as the character he'd created, not as the man he'd been born. But the mask slipped occasionally, revealing glimpses of Marion Morrison. During the filming of The Cowboys, 1872, Wayne was working with a group of young actors, many appearing in their first major film, Between Takes. When he thought no one was watching, crew members noticed that he seemed more relaxed, more genuine. He would tell stories about his early days in Hollywood, about learning to ride, about the terror of those first Western roles. Mr. Wayne told us he was scared to death during his first horse scene, recalled Robert Carradine, who played one of the cowboys in the film. He said he spent the whole time praying he wouldn't fall off and embarrass himself. It was the most human I ever saw him. These moments became rarer as Wayne aged. The character he'd created had taken over so completely that spontaneity became almost impossible. Every public appearance was calculated to maintain the John Wayne image. Every interview reinforced the mythology. Every photograph had to show strength, confidence, American values. The tragic irony is that in becoming John Wayne so completely, Marion Morrison achieved a kind of immortality. But it was the immortality of a lie, a beautiful lie that America needed to believe. The final image shows an aging John Wayne walking slowly across a movie set at sunset, his famous silhouette unchanged but somehow smaller than before. Behind him, the set is being dismantled, the fake Western town revealing itself to be nothing but painted wood and careful illusion. The truth behind the legend Faye. So what is the real truth about John Wayne? The truth is more complex and more human than either his admirers or his critics want to admit. Marion Morrison was a working-class kid from Iowa who stumbled into fame and spent the rest of his life trying to live up to an impossible standard. He was never the fearless gunslinger or the natural horseman that his characters portrayed. He was something both more and less than his legend suggests. He was an actor who committed so completely to his role that he lost himself in the process. The horses that made him famous. He learned to tolerate them, but he never loved them the way real cowboys do. The guns that defined his screen persona. They remained tools of his trade, nothing more. The confidence that radiated from every John Wayne performance. It was the confidence of a man who had learned to hide his doubts so well that even he sometimes forgot they were there. But here is what makes the John Wayne story truly remarkable. Knowing all of this doesn't diminish his legacy. If anything, it makes it more impressive. Think about it. Marion Morrison, a scared kid who was afraid of horses and uncomfortable with violence, created one of the most enduring symbols of American courage and determination, Through sheer will and decades of practice, he became the cowboy he was never born to be. Every time John Wayne rode across the screen, every time he faced down the bad guys, every time he delivered those iconic lines about justice and honor and doing what is right, Marion Morrison was performing an act of incredible bravery. He was pretending to be fearless while battling his own fears, projecting strength while feeling vulnerable, embodying an American ideal that he himself was still striving to achieve. In the end, maybe that is what made John Wayne so compelling. He wasn't born a hero, Faye. He chose to become one performance at a time, one film at a time, until the choice became so habitual that it transformed him completely. The man who was never a cowboy became the greatest cowboy of all, not because it came naturally, but because he worked harder than anyone else to make it look natural. Marion Morrison disappeared not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to sacrifice his own identity for something larger than himself. Faith, the screen fades to black, and in the silence, we can almost hear the echo of spurs on wooden boardwalks, the sound of a legend walking into the sunset one final time. Asterisk. And that, perhaps, is the most American story of all. The story of a man who became more than he was born to be, who created himself through determination and sheer force of will. Marion Morrison may have been afraid of horses, but John Wayne taught a nation how to be brave. The cowboy was never real, but the courage it took to create him, that was as real as anything Hollywood ever produced. Faith, the final frame shows an empty western street at twilight. No heroes in sight. Just the lingering promise that somewhere, somehow, the spirit of John Wayne rides on Faye, not because the man was perfect, but because the myth he created was too important to die. Asterisk.